Most enforcers waited for trouble. Matthew Barnaby started it.
The linesmen get in.
42 hours in the penalty box. He fought everyone, trash-talked legends, made superstars take stupid penalties. But the league kept him around anyway.
He was one of the best at getting under your skin, and even with that smile after he did it, that was enough to drive you nuts, I'll tell you that.
Hockey's biggest villain became its most valuable asset. The NHL just didn't want to admit it.
If I told you that you are one of the most unpopular players in the NHL, would you be surprised? No.
Over 14 seasons, Matthew Barnaby accumulated 2,562 penalty minutes across 834 games. That translates to 42 hours and 42 minutes spent sitting in penalty boxes. The average NHL player during that era collected maybe 500 penalty minutes across an entire career. Barnaby passed that mark by his third season. He stood 6 feet tall and weighed 189 pounds, undersized for a league where enforcers typically carried an extra 20 or 30 pounds. His 113 goals and 300 points suggested he could play, but those numbers were always overshadowed by what happened when he didn't stay on the ice. In 1996, during a game against Philadelphia, Barnaby appeared injured after taking a hit. When a brawl broke out, he jumped to his feet and went after Flyers goaltender Garth Snow, who had been jabbing him with a stick while officials looked elsewhere. He'd been waiting for the right moment. In February 2000, the league suspended him for 5 games after an altercation with New York Islanders defenseman Eric Cairns. The suspension cost him more than $60,000 in salary, increased specifically because officials labeled him a repeat offender. By that point, the label fit. He fought his own teammates in practice. In November 1999, he dropped the gloves against Rob Ray, his former Buffalo teammate and roommate, less than 24 hours after the two had dinner together. 4 different teams traded for him. Buffalo to Pittsburgh in 1999, Pittsburgh to Tampa Bay in 2001, Tampa to the Rangers 29 games later. Each organization reached the same conclusion after a season or two. The entertainment value came with too much risk. But here's what nobody saw coming. Barnaby described his approach in a 2004 interview without hesitation. I said some nasty, nasty things to people about their wives, their girlfriends. I truly believe I was at my best when I was engaged. I got myself into the game, and that was the best for my time. The targeting wasn't random. During his time with Buffalo in the mid-1990s, Barnaby would identify the opposing team's highest paid forward within the first period and spend the rest of the game working to get that player off the ice. A slash to the back of the leg during a face-off. A comment about someone's family while skating past the bench. Anything that would provoke a response that officials couldn't ignore. When a $7 million player took a retaliatory penalty because of something Barnaby said or did, the math became simple. His estimated league minimum salary of around $600,000 had just removed the other team's most expensive asset for 2 minutes or more. Teams began viewing him differently once the pattern became clear. He wasn't just an enforcer who fought when challenged. He was deliberately manufacturing situations that benefited his team, even when he ended up in the penalty box alongside his targets. The Sabres roster in the late 1990s included Dominik Hasek in goal and a collection of skilled forwards who needed space to operate. Barnaby created that space by forcing opposing teams to worry about retaliation instead of defensive structure. The 1996-97 season revealed the problem opposing coaches faced when preparing for Buffalo. Barnaby recorded 19 goals and 43 points across 68 games that year, a career high that placed him among the team's top contributors offensively. The same player who led the league with 335 penalty minutes the previous season had suddenly become a legitimate scoring threat. Teams couldn't assign a checking line enforcer to shadow him because he'd simply beat that player with speed and skill. But if they assigned a defensive specialist, Barnaby would provoke that player into a fight and remove him from the game entirely. His 300 career points arrived spread out across 834 games, which translates to scoring at roughly a 29-point pace over a full 82-game season. Those numbers don't suggest elite talent, but they do indicate someone capable of contributing beyond intimidation. Game footage from his time with the Rangers between 2001 and 2004 shows him scoring on breakaways, setting up goals from behind the net, and creating offensive chances that had nothing to do with his reputation. The February 2000 suspension represented the closest the league came to removing Barnaby permanently. After his altercation with Eric Carnes escalated beyond the ice, league officials convened meetings specifically about his future in hockey. The 5-game suspension and $60,000 in forfeited salary weren't just punitive measures. They were warnings that his pattern of behavior had reached a threshold the NHL could no longer ignore publicly. The media wanted him gone. Sponsors were nervous. Parents were writing letters to league offices. If you were the NHL commissioner in 2001, what would you do? The players making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Parents are complaining. Your broadcast partners are asking questions. But 7 different teams keep trading for him anyway, which suggests general managers see value you can't quantify in penalty statistics. What happened in the 48 hours after the February 2000 suspension revealed why teams continued bringing Barnaby back despite the controversy. Teammates from multiple organizations spoke to reporters and league officials about incidents that never made highlight reels or penalty sheets. During games where opposing enforcers targeted skilled players recovering from injuries, Barnaby would deliberately start confrontations to redirect that attention toward himself. He absorbed punishment meant for the players the organization couldn't afford to lose. His former teammate Rob Ray explained the dynamic years later when discussing their time together in Buffalo. Bob understood their roles required confrontation, even against friends. Ray noted that Barnaby's willingness to fight heavyweights like Bob Probert, Ty Domi, and Donald Brashear meant smaller, skilled players could focus on offense without constantly watching for incoming hits. Opposing coaches acknowledged this reality even when criticizing Barnaby's methods. The pattern repeated itself consistently. Teams that faced Buffalo or Pittsburgh during Barnaby's tenure had to account for him in their game planning, which meant deploying checking line players who might have otherwise been assigned to shadow star forwards. The league's decision to allow Barnaby to continue playing came down to recognition that his role, however controversial, served a function within the game's existing structure. Removing him wouldn't eliminate the behavior. It would just mean someone else would fill that role with less skill and more risk. So here's why the NHL kept him around. Games featuring Barnaby sold more tickets than games where he was injured or suspended. His fights appeared on SportsCenter more frequently than most star players' goals. And fans bought his jersey as a joke, wearing the number of hockey's most controversial player to games as ironic commentary. Then they kept buying it when the joke wore off. Road games where Barnaby appeared on the opposing team's roster showed measurable increases in ticket sales compared to typical matchups. Arenas in markets like Toronto and Boston, where hockey culture ran deep and crowds appreciated aggressive play, treated his appearances as events worth attending, regardless of the final score. The merchandise data revealed something the league hadn't expected. Those jersey sales sustained themselves beyond the novelty phase. People kept buying them season after season, which suggested the irony had shifted into genuine appreciation for what he represented. His highlights appeared on ESPN SportsCenter with notable frequency compared to other role players during that period. Fights, confrontations, and post-game controversies generated clips that sports media could replay and discuss throughout the week. The NHL's television deal with ESPN and ABC, signed in 1999 for $600 million over 5 years, represented the league's attempt to position itself alongside the NBA and NFL as a major broadcast property. Barnaby provided content that justified that investment consistently. Remember, the question wasn't whether Barnaby was too controversial. The question was whether that controversy was profitable. By 2000, ABC's Stanley Cup final ratings had dropped to a 3.7, continuing to decline year after year. The NHL was losing the television war to the NBA and NFL. The league needed personalities that transcended the sport itself, players who could generate conversation among people who didn't follow hockey regularly. Disney executives were watching returns diminish while NBA and NFL numbers remained stable or grew. The league faced pressure to deliver content that would perform on SportsCenter and drive casual viewership to live games. Barnaby created storylines that required no explanation. Former teammates dropping gloves against each other, suspensions generating more headlines than playoff games. His 5-game suspension in February 2000 generated more coverage across mainstream sports outlets than several received during their entire playoff runs that year. The comparison nobody made publicly during that era was to professional wrestling. WWE had demonstrated that audiences would pay to watch villains they genuinely wanted to see lose. Barnaby filled that role in hockey, creating antagonism that made every game he played feel like it carried stakes beyond the standings. The villain role wasn't just tolerated. It was strategically essential to the league's survival in the broadcast marketplace. The calculation behind Barnaby's on-ice behavior became explicit years after his retirement. In interviews promoting his 2022 autobiography, he described studying what generated media attention and deliberately replicating those patterns. He watched professional wrestling promos to understand how performers built antagonistic characters that audiences wanted to see confronted. He analyzed boxing press conferences to learn how fighters created tension before matches. He adapted those techniques to hockey, understanding that the same principles would work in a sport where physical confrontation was already embedded in the culture. During his playing career, Barnaby kept notes on which specific incidents generated the most coverage. When a particular type of confrontation appeared on SportsCenter or made headlines in major newspapers, he would remember that approach and deploy it again in future games. The notebook existed as evidence of someone treating controversy as a skill that could be developed and refined through practice. His transition to broadcasting immediately after retirement in 2007 wasn't circumstantial. Barnaby had spent 14 seasons making himself recognizable to hockey audiences and sports media professionals. When ESPN hired him as an NHL analyst in 2008, they were bringing in someone who already understood how to generate viewer interest and create television moments. His firing in 2011 after a DWI arrest ended that particular opportunity, but he rebuilt his media presence through podcasting and radio work that continues as of 2025. In his autobiography, Barnaby addressed his career with complete self-awareness. A Hockey Night in Canada feature in 1998 called me the most unpopular player in the NHL. I had found my role. I was an agitator. I was always chirping, and I often said things on the ice that I shouldn't have. It got me in trouble sometimes. It put a target on my back. The modern NHL operates under conditions that make another Matthew Barnaby impossible. The league's current broadcast deals with ESPN and Turner prioritize family-friendly content and highlight skilled play over physical confrontation. Social media creates immediate backlash that forces teams to respond within hours rather than days. But every league still needs its villains. They just look a little different now. Barnaby didn't break the system. He understood it better than anyone else playing during his era. The NHL kept him around for 834 games because he solved a problem the league faced in attracting and maintaining audience attention during a period when hockey struggled to compete with other major sports for television viewers and casual fans. The villain was never the problem. He was the solution the league didn't want to admit it needed. If you want more stories about the players and moments hockey would rather forget, subscribe to Skates and Scars. We don't protect reputations. We don't rewrite history. We tell the stories exactly where the league stopped talking.